Okay, so let's go ahead and get started then. So this is intended to be for you guys. It's a high-level overview of VLab. I just want to make sure that when we're talking about strategy and where we're going in the future, there's a good understanding of what VLab is and the services we're offering today, because it's much more than just the portal that oftentimes people see. Or we have other users that really only interact with the development services side. So I just wanted to touch on all the aspects of it. So that's the intention of today. And if there are any questions along the way, please don't hesitate to stop me. So, as defined, I took this from a general presentation that we give, and I updated some of the metrics and things from some of our teammates have keep up to date counts on certain analytics. But so it's basically a set of services, an IT framework which enable no employees and their partners to share ideas, collaborate, engage in software development, and conduct applied research. That's a very short summary of what we're trying to do. Our goal is to manage innovation, streamline operations to research, and accelerate research to operations. So within NOAA. So our genesis, or we started from with a focus on the Weather Service, because MDL is part of the Weather Service, but we realized that it could be used throughout NOAA, so we opened that up. So the two main components of VLab in terms of ways in which people interact is one through communities, and that's VLab communities, and that's the portal side. We often call that Virtual Lab Collaboration Services, and it allows users with common interests to collaborate using tools like forums, blogs, wikis, document libraries, web forms, and workflow. The communities manifest themselves in different ways. There are some that are more focused on like topics, like for example, it might be the National Blend of Models. There are others that are more focused on like intranets, where we've had within the last couple of months, all of the offices within National Weather Service headquarters now have sites. They're called one-stop sites, and I can show you that briefly, where it allows those offices to place in one location all the relevant information, or most of the relevant information that's needed for their staff. So it's making it one place to go. It doesn't necessarily mean that all the content has to be there, but it's a place to go to get the information so it can point to external information. And that's really what a portal's really good at, and that is basically collecting information, pulling content together, and enabling users to go to that one spot and not have to jump through emails, out to documents, and have to jump into lots of different places. So anyway, so the other side is development services, and this is where we're more focused on integrated project management, issue tracking, software repositories, continuous integration. I'll get into what that means, and code review tools. So this is centered around projects, and oftentimes these are projects that have code or software behind them. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but some of the tools like continuous integration and code review strictly only apply to code, but as well as obviously the software repositories. But I guess in theory you could use it to collect documentation, things like that too. So we'll get into that. So this is kind of a picture or an image, a flowchart, conceptually breaking it down. So at the top we have Virtual Lab as a whole. It's broken down and left the collaboration services, which I mentioned are centered around the communities, which have different, standard web tools that we're all familiar with, hopefully, by doing things online through Google or other, websites that we're used to, where there are blogs, document libraries, web content, wikis, forums, and it's ways of sharing information with a group of users. And then what the collaboration services does is organize it and give us tools for creating groups, roles, permissions. It's a very robust system, and we'll touch on that. I think most people are familiar with that. On the development services side, we're using project management issue tracking, and we use an open source project called Redmine, or open source software called Redmine to handle that. Redmine then, in addition to being able to track issues or tickets, it also ties into revision control systems. So that's software repositories where you have multiple revisions. So if you're familiar with software development, it supports, or we are supporting, both Subversion and most projects today are using Git because of its distributed nature. And so I'll show you how this manifests itself within the projects and give you an idea of some of the different projects that we have going on, and there are a lot. There are a lot of communities too, and I'll give you an example of that. Tied into, if you do have software that you're managing through a project, you also have the ability to review that code and collaborate with other developers and have them review it before it actually makes its way into the repository and is made accessible to the general, that's all set up, but basically is made accessible to your team. So the other piece is continuous integration. We're using a open source software called Jenkins. Some people that may have, it's also the predecessor for it is called Hudson, but Jenkins is the software we're using. It's used throughout industry, and it's open source. On the code review side, we're using something called Garrett, and that was developed by Google in support of the Android operating system. And so anyway, everything's open source with the exception of collaboration services, which we started out using open source, and we actually switched to an enterprise edition of LifeRay, which they do offer an open source or community edition. We started there, and it was very time consuming to keep up with putting together patches and other things, and there were some nice features available with the enterprise edition, so we switched to that a few years ago. So that's a very high level view of the different components. In terms of history, I think we talked about this actually in a meeting, the last meeting. So the history back in February 2012, there's a vision team chartered. We had the approval in October. Our initial operating date was on February 18th, 2013. And we initially were hosted within NIDS in Kansas City, and also at headquarters for the development services, and all of that was migrated over to NOAA's IDP in College Park. And so we've been growing since that point. So our philosophy when it comes to this is, and you'll get a sense for the number of projects and communities that we have, and based upon our staff, there's no way that we can be controlling and do everything for everyone. So the idea here is to delegate and hand over what we like to say is we hand over the keys. So someone makes a request for a new project or a new community. We make sure that it's not something that there already is a similar project, or we'll point that out to people, or a similar community. And then basically, typically the same business day or the next, the project or community is created, and we point them to our user guides and give them the keys, and they're off and running. And then we offer consultations and support. We have a VLab admin email address that people connect to or send requests to. and we staff that during business days, Eastern time, and basically respond to people within, our goal is to respond within an hour. And people like that because that's somewhat unique. So in terms of geographical distribution, we are using Google Analytics to get a feel for our user base, how they're behaving. Google Analytics gives us a lot of information about the browsers that people are using, whether they're using tablets or on their phone or from desktops, what operating system, and where people are coming from. And so this is, I just did a quick check this morning and did a summary over the last year, and this was traffic on VLCS side, and you can obviously see the bigger circles are areas where there's more traffic, and you can see there's a lot, of course, in the DC area, in Silver Spring, back in Dallas, Oklahoma City. That's probably not Oklahoma City, that's Norman, with NSSL is a big user. So we got Kansas City, and then there's another big one, out in Colorado. And then each of the, you can really see WFOs across the nation, and there's a lot of use. So that's a good thing. So as I mentioned, we're using LifeRay, Subversion, Redmine, Git, Jenkins, and Garrett Code Review. Those are the software pieces that make up VLab, or the underpinnings, and then we basically have configured it to meet the needs, or we try to, modify it where it's necessary. Add each of these infrastructures in terms of LifeRay, Redmine, Jenkins, and Garrett are all pluggable architectures, so you can develop plugins for them. In the case of LifeRay, it's a portal. It's an the core of it's an open source Java-based portal framework, and so there are portlets that run within it. So there's been a lot of growth in terms of our users. So these are people that have logged in. I want to change the way we're calculating this, and that is see the growth of users that have logged in over the last 30 days or something like that. So these are total number of users that have logged in. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're logging in every day. But you can see we've had, on the collaboration services side, over 5,000 users log in. These are almost all NOAA users, because you have to have either a Google, you can single sign-on, use single sign-on. We implemented that in the last year, and that allows people, if they're logged into your mail, you'll be able to get into VLab. And we've done that for collaboration services, Redmine, which is the project management, and also Garrett, which is the code review. Or you can use your NOAA LDAP credentials. So at least for the time being, because I've been told that NOAA LDAP is going away at some point in the next year and a half or something like that. So rapid growth in both areas. This is from January of 2013 through October of this year. And then on the community side, you can see there's been tremendous growth. I'm sorry, that was the project side. Projects took off from the start, and it just keeps going up. There are some really steep areas where that's probably where we actually implemented. We created projects for each of the WFOs, so those are within VLab. So we've got some areas where there was a jump, like over 100 projects in a very short time. And the same thing happened around this time where we did that. We created communities for each of the WFOs and RFCs within the Weather Service. And so anyway, we'll leave it at that. So on the community side, you can see there's been tremendous growth too. Now we're around 400 communities, and we're up over 1,000 projects now. So we've got a lot going on. Steve Smith likes to point out that there's a lot of intellectual knowledge being stored within VLab, and so this is a reflection of the number of repositories that these are software repositories that are hosted within VLab, and you can see this has gone up significantly too. And there's been a lot of growth. It's probably even up beyond this now, because over the last 2 months, we've migrated, I think there's one last batch that we're doing this week of about 20 different repositories from EMC. So we've got over 130, I think it's probably over 140 EMC repositories that were migrated from Subversion. These are used for the modeling code that's used within the nation. And also all of AWIP's repositories are hosted within VLab, and then a lot of other projects too. The software collaboration portal. So anyway, you can see that it's over, we're probably over this 800 mark now. I'm not going to go through the highlights, but there are a tremendous number of communities and projects. I've tried to touch on some of that. The EMC modeling, this software collaboration portal, which is used for local apps within AWIPS. Office water prediction has a bunch of projects in there that they're using, for operation type support. CHIPS is one of them. National Blend of Models. So there's impacts catalog. They're very high value projects taking place within VLab, as well as some very small ones. So one of the goals that we've always tried to maintain is not make things super complex or not require. What we've done is we've created software project or services that promote best practice, and they're there and available for people, but we're not going to, it's always been my philosophy that someone coming in that's never done software development, you don't want to say, oh, you need to use revision control, you need to use ticketing, you need to use version, code review. We want to start out small and then allow them to grow as their projects mature. But then on the other hand, we also we're supporting from the ground up AWIPS, which has a very complex workflow and has to use all those different components, as well as EMC is doing that too. So we don't force people to do certain things, but we're making those tools available to them. So in the future, we're doing some work. Now NOAA officially allows the use of GitHub.com. Previously it did not. You might ask, why do we care about that from VLab side? The reason we care is that it's not our intention to be the repository holder for all of the public. That's GitHub.com does a great job at that. And so we're trying to fit a need for NOAA and for NOAA and its core partners. And if there are situations where projects need to be wide open, VLab isn't the place for it, but you can do your development within VLab on more sensitive or things that shouldn't be out in the open, and then Git provides mechanisms for being able to push the content over to somewhere like GitHub.com. So anyway, we're also going through an upgrade right now of LifeRay to a newer version called DXP. We're focused on the look and feel of the site, as well as there's focused on improving the search within the site itself. That's a key component of any portal, is the search has to be right on, and at the moment there's room for improvement there. So that's the presentation part. Hopefully you guys are all there still, right?
Yep.
I'm here.
Okay, good. I've had that happen before where I've been rambling for like 10, 15 minutes, and all of a sudden I'm like, I was talking to myself that whole time. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, would you talk a little bit about, so one of the things that the strategic planning team might get involved in is sort of coming up with new things that the VLab can do. And I know that LifeRay and Redmine and maybe even some of the other tools that we use are extensible, that there are things that can be sort of added to them. Could you explain a little bit about how that works?
Sure.
The idea of portal.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so let's take a look. So we'll start with something that's probably familiar to everyone. So this is, let's just go to the home page, the landing page for VLCS. And so VLCS, it's, you might say, oh, it's just a website. It is just a website, but there's a lot to it. It's back-ended by a relational database, and this is a enterprise portal. Each section you see here is a portlet, okay? And we can do things like we can develop custom portlets. So for example, the NOAA projects registry, if you've seen that, that was a custom portlet that one of our developers wrote and I assisted with. And it basically allows NOAA to track, in particular the Weather Service to track research operations and keep track of the RL level of these different projects and see where things are stalling, what's happening with the projects. And so we had a lot of requirements for this, and this allows people to, this was custom developed, and so you can kind of think of it as a mini application running within the site itself. And all the data and everything's being stored, it's all being indexed, so it's searchable. And anyway, that's an example of a portlet. The portal itself comes with a lot of canned or out-of-the-box portlets that we're taking advantage of, and within each of these communities, we use those. So, for example, on the landing page, if you look here, it's a content management system. So that's what you see here is this quick access. It's just a web content display. So basically there's a WYSIWYG editor that allows you to go in. And so if I switched over to another community where it's okay for me to make changes, I can just give you a reflection of that. But what I want to convey is that everything you see here is customizable. And a lot of it's customizable right through the interface itself. You don't have to get onto the file system and make changes. We can deploy changes within this infrastructure and keep it running. So it's called hot deployable. And we can overwrite the behavior. So there's a tremendous amount that can be done. And in fact, part of the reason we're moving forward to the new version of this infrastructure called Liferay is that it's OSGI compliant. So that's a standard for making it more modular. So we can actually roll out bigger pieces and make changes in other areas and not have it necessarily impact users. So if anyone's familiar with AWIPS, the architecture there are some similarities. They're trying to use OSGI for some of the components. They've done a good job with some parts, but not with others. And so that's the direction that they're going, they being Raytheon, in terms of getting like the install times down and stuff like that. The frameworks that we're using already employ that. So we can do a lot without impacting our users. So that's on the VLCS side, and so what I meant is, there's a lot here that we can do. We can just go in and configure things, the look and feel of each of these portlets. That's all accessible to the community owners. So it's not a normal user wouldn't be able to do that. But you can also do things like, so if I go to come back over here, if I want to add another portlet to the page, we can do that, and just basically, oops, I did the wrong one, sorry, add, control, so I'm clicking on the wrong thing. So yeah, so you can come in here, change look and feel of this page, and then something's funky on this layout. So typically you would just add something right to the page, but I'm having an issue at the moment with my browser. So anyway, you get a sense for there's a lot that can be done. And so if there are mission critical things that we think we should be able to do that are tied in with collaboration, you know, or for example, you could even use, I know some of the regions have used, within the Weather Service, have used SharePoint historically to address like internet concerns. You know, that could be done within VLab and VLCS at the regional level, and because there's a whole, the interface itself allows us to go in and create organizations, and these are hierarchical organizations, and so we've done that within certain areas. You know, like within NOAA, we have the Weather Service. We don't have the other line offices right now because there hasn't been a desire to do that yet. But you can see within here, then there are the different regions. Within each of the regions, you know, we have the WFOs and such. So so you can see that. And so anyway, and we're tying this into NOAA's LDAP so that when people log in, it can actually, when you log in, you're assigned to the right organization based upon your LDAP attributes, and then that way you don't have to go in and join a community directly for things like that. So that's a very high level view of VLCS. I didn't get into many of the different tools and things like forums and wikis and blogs. Are you guys already familiar with that, or is that something that you want me to touch on quickly?
Hey, Ken, I think it might be good just to quickly touch on those and the differences between them and the capabilities.
Okay, I can do that.
Ken?
Yeah.
I was going to say one thing before you get into that was,
sure.
Is there anything that the team should be thinking about in terms of a 3 to 5 year plan in terms of the sustainability of LifeRay and open source? You know, what happens if LifeRay goes away? It's easily replaceable by some other software package that comes around. One of the problems with SharePoint that you were mentioning was that it was Microsoft specific, and you know, if it didn't have the features or wasn't really compatible, then you're SOL, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
touch on that a little.
Sure. So LifeRay, just to give you a sense, I think it's been around for 14 years now. Their community base has been growing significantly. When I started interacting with them, the company had less than 100 employees. Now I think they're up to 800 or something like that, and they're global in nature. And they have, so I think the stability of that platform is very sound. So I would place a bet on that. But in terms of the infrastructure, they're using standards. So there are portal specifications, and they're adhering to those. There are some add-ons and things like that, and we are using some portlets that are specific to LifeRay. So I'm not going to lie, if we were told that we needed to switch to a different portal infrastructure, it would be a big deal, but it could be done. So yeah, so that's that. On the other components, so remember, we've got LifeRay, which is the portal. That's the only one where we're actually spending money on it today, because we did go with that enterprise license. On the project management, that's Redmine. I'll get into that once I show you that in a minute. So let's very quickly go back, and I'll give you a quick tour of some of the capabilities that you have within a community. So let's go to, this community is just a test community, so it's really messy. So let me switch to a different community. So I'll go to like the National Blend of Models, and so that community is being used primarily. This is for coordination, within the field offices to get feedback on the national blended models. And so the main mechanism that they're using in this particular community is the forum. So forum, some people know them as message boards. It's basically glorified email, but the advantage is that if you're a community member, you can come in here and all of those threads are searchable, and you can go in and so in cases where you can attach images, and I'm trying to get a good example of that. These aren't good examples. So let me see if I can get one that's had more traffic. That might be more. Nope. So I should have prepared for this better by actually coming in here. So you have to trust me. If I chose one, let's see, GFS station was. So you can embed images within it, and that's been very powerful because forecasters like to go in and capture images and say, hey, this isn't doing such a great job in the higher terrain or things like that. That's all within here. You can also go in and subscribe. So that's a big part of many of the different services for collaboration, so that as a user, you can say, oh, I really care about national blended models and what they're saying, or you may care about some other project or specifics, and within a community itself, you can break down your forums more granularly. Like within AWIPS, we're working with the AWIPS program to switch theirs up so they're not necessarily just using list servers, they're using the forums, and then they can have special categories for different areas. So like, for example, for the administration, ITO type issues, as opposed to maybe just WarnGen specific issues. I know that WarnGen has its own info list, but that's an example of where you can break it up, and then people can subscribe to what they want. They can get the email notification. You can respond to the email without even going into VLab. But then you can come in after the fact and do searches for things. You can do searches at the top that, if you want to search for anything related to tornadoes and do a search. So everything would search over all the communities that you're a member of. Or I can just search within the one community, and basically then it returns a result set, which then breaks it down. And we're going to be revamping this. So let me, I could go on I'm going to go on too long, so I don't want to dive too deep. But so search is very important. We know that there's room for improvement. We want to streamline this to make it very simple, more a Google type approach. And then if people want to dive in and see all the different communities that the results are from, or the different types of entities, so whether, okay, I want to look at only the documents or only the forum messages, I could do that and filter it based upon that. So right now, people are overwhelmed by it. So let's look at some of the other things. So some of the other areas, let me switch to another community that's using other capabilities. Let's see what stock synthesis has. So stock synthesis is a community that's this is actually outside of the Weather Service, and so in fisheries, and so they have a huge external partner base, and so they have a lot of people coming and using this community that aren't part of NOAA, but are members of the university and other governments and things like that. So anyway, they, I think, are using forums. There is the ability, each community has its own document library, so you can upload documents. Those are all scanned, and then that's all part of the search as well. Previews are generated so that when you go in, you don't have to download the images to see them. You can look at them and then see them first. There's ratings. You can comment on the documents. There's a lot of capabilities there. Blogs are another tool that's available, and I'll show you. We have a virtual lab support team community that's private, I haven't talked about that, but there's private, public, and also restricted communities, and so that each of those has their own connotation. So everything here is built around collaboration, okay? Sharing of information. Blogs are a way that you can go in and you can distribute information to people. You're an expert within your field. People care about what you have to say, and so a blog would be a mechanism to do that. The forums is an email conversation that's captured within a website, so it's searchable after the fact. So if someone else comes into the conversation, you're not having to forward a bunch of email threads to them. You can just point them to the community. That's where that really benefits people. So those are some of the tools that are available within here. And I think we're doing a pretty good job, but there are definitely opportunities. On the development side, where we're focused there, and so this one here has, I didn't even mention it, we also have a wiki, like Wikipedia, that allows you to go in and create pages and collaboratively work on documents. There's an online forums builder. The problem with just an hour is that there's so much that I could say, but so anyway, those are some of the tools on the collaboration services side. On the development services side, so if we go in, this is centered around projects, and so let's go out and I'll just show you. So VLab itself is using it. So all of my projects, and that's probably way too small for you guys. Okay, so each project has team members. They each have roles. So you can be a manager, you can be a developer, you could be staff, and so there are, and then just reporters. So those are roles. There are different types of tickets or issues, and that's what these represent here. And then it keeps track of the time when people enter it in. So you can see that over 7,000 hours have been spent on VLab, and that's the time that actually has been entered. And then, so the projects are private by default. So what this allows people to do is work together on a project. That's really what it comes down to. It can also be used as a way to report bugs. So there may be software that's out there and there's a need to report bugs. So like Iris, which was a community developed software project within the regions, that project is managed within VLab, and they have the ability, because their software is out and being used, people can write issues on their existing software, and so that's another way in which this can be used. So it may be used to track requirements, it might be used to write bugs, or it could be used to write tasks and things like that. And it's being used within the field. So if we come down to the projects level, I'll show you an example of that. So if we go, there are a lot of them, but so these are for the different regions, and I think I went too far. Okay, so LWX, for example, they're using it to track their issues, and they have sub-issues or sub-projects too, so it can be a hierarchy. So they've got one for their ITOs, their AWIPS configuration files, SUE, WCM, and close. And so for each of these, you can come in and see the activity, what's been going on. You can also look at the issues itself, there are filters, there's a tremendous amount there. So, and then for projects that actually have code associated with them, and so I'll just show you, there are a bunch within the AWIPS side. These are all AWIPS projects here that are listed. I'm going to go, just because I know it'll come up quickly, to the administration side and VLab. So we have a bunch of if I click on the repositories tab, that's going to give you visibility to all the different project repositories that we are maintaining within VLab. So one of the ones here, I can come up and go to a particular branch, and then I can see from within here the code base. Okay, these are different commits. We use a standard where we track this back to the issues. So anything going into the repository, there's accountability, and we actually ensure that by using a verification job. This gets into what continuous integration is. And so that is, oftentimes you want to run something automatic when code gets checked in. Maybe you want to scan it for bugs or security threats, or maybe you want to just ensure that the person committing it has the authority to do so. And so within Garrett, which is the code review piece, it also provides very strict or granular access controls over the repositories themselves. So I want to give an opportunity for you guys to ask questions too. The focus here is, that we've been on is focused on code project, project centered around code. That's been a lot of it. There's also been a focus on the community side. We haven't been as focused on like project management per se, not to say that the tools and services that we're offering can't be used for project management. And in fact, many of them are, but they're not as robust as perhaps like if you're coming from Microsoft Project or things like that, where you're keeping track of whether or not someone's over allocated or under allocated. And that's some of the area where personally I believe that there's room for growth in that area and providing some of the tools. And within Redmine, which we're looking at here, there's an administrative interface, and John was asking me to show you. So here, these are some of the plugins that we have installed. Some of these, like this first one here, category registration plugin, we developed this in-house. That was in support of the software collaboration portal. There are a couple that, like the Agile plugin, that's supporting Agile development, and that was actually purchased. It wasn't very much money. I think it was $400 or $500, something like that. And the checklist, again, that was a couple $100. So they were reasonable, and they could give us and the VLab and NOAA the capabilities that we felt were important, and that's where we went to the VIT and talked with them, about these sorts of requests. So there's the Google single sign-on. We started with something else and then modified it to meet our needs. And so anyway, so we get many requests where people ask, oh, could you do things? And in fact, EMC has requested a lot on the project management side lately, where, oh, can you do more in terms of resource allocation, tracking people, making sure that they're not over allocated. And that's something that's a natural fit for this platform. And in fact, there are capabilities there are plugins available, and we've been evaluating some of them. So those are areas. The infrastructure is very, it supports building it out in a modular nature, because that's how they were designed. Jenkins, which is the continuous integration piece, that's a part that I mentioned where it kicks off when code gets checked in, and you can require that things verify before it actually makes its way into the repositories. That's an area where I think there's a lot of room for growth there too. We're really underutilizing it. There's the possibility, to build infrastructure. I think there's a lot of room for growth from my perspective in using cloud services. The weather service is behind the 8 ball in that respect. And being able to spin up a virtual machine in the cloud that would build certain software, run checks against it, do security scanning, do all of that. There's a lot that can be done, and it wouldn't be that difficult within the under the guise of VLab. So anyway, you guys have any questions for me?
Hey, this is Jonathan Raleigh. I'm not sure if this is the best time to bring these kind of questions up, but I'll fire away. So I'm still probably relatively new at this kind of stuff. What percentage of the VLab users are weather service versus the remainder of NOAA?
I would guess, it's a guess, but I'd say 80% or higher are weather service. It's a very high percentage.
And did it originate as a weather service item?
Yeah, it did. So MDL, where VLab was conceived, is part of the weather service, and so obviously the use cases. On the development services side, we were very much focused initially on AWIPs. That's where much of the funding comes from. So that was it was geared towards that. But it was applicable across the board, and so we have had big adopters, like from fisheries and other groups. But yeah, it's I'd have to go in and check in terms. We do have the line office that's specified for the users, so we could get an accurate count. But I'm sure it's over 80%.
And so there are people who are full-time dedicated to this, right? What kind of resources are provided to the program?
Yeah, so it's Steve Smith, who is John Chattel's my boss. He's the director of the VLab, and so he's basically grouped together. It's a team of around 12. It's made up of a combination of Cooperative Institute employees, federal employees. There are a couple just pure contractors. And not everyone on that team, actually many of the people are doing other things too. So some people such as myself and John, and there are a couple others that are dedicated to this work, but for the most part it's a combination.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
No, I was going to say that was a good question from Jonathan. It might be worth an action to take is to find out a little bit more in terms of the strategic plan, is because the three who are on our weather service, is there, how should we take the rest of NOAA into account? So that might be an action, John, coming out of this call. It's a good question.
Yeah, one of the things that I've always thought from the start, and we just haven't had time to do it, is that like the landing page and things like that, when you log into VLab, a lot could be done to tailor it to the particular audience. So, there are certain things. So like we have on here weather service specific stuff. If some of the other, line offices had similar needs, then, we could do things for them, and then also tailor the information to that particular office, so or to the audience that you're a member of. So there's a lot that could be done that we haven't done. So. Any other questions or comments or areas you want me to dive in? We've only got a couple minutes left. I can stay longer if need be. I don't know if others want to or not.
Hey, Ken.
Is this an operation? This is Jonathan again. Sorry. Is this an operational item that's supported, like if there's a crisis, emergency, or how does that work? If there's a failure or deficiency?
Yeah, so VLab is hosted in IDP, which is at College Park. They have a hosting facility in Boulder as well. We're on the plans to be hosted at Boulder too, so that if something were to happen at the site level, it could be failed over to the other side. There are plans to be quote unquote operational, and from NCO's perspective, we're on the same hardware as all of the operational systems, but at the moment, if there was some sort of hardware failure within IDP that brought our services down, we have a lower priority than some of the other systems like MRMS or things like that that are classified as being operational.
But hint, and I think we said this on the prior call, is I would love if that comes out of the strategic planning team as a recommendation with some logic as to, or some rationale as to why that is needed. If it's going to be used for software collaboration, if it's going to be used in the case of the new MDS tool, the Mesoscale Domain Sector tool, an operational thing, then that should be a recommendation, hopefully, of the strategic planning team, that it needs to be operationally supported just as much as anything else. So we've already answered one question, I think, there, in terms of what we're hoping to see, but hopefully there's a little rationale as to why that's needed. So that would help the cause. Ken, you have and John, do we have any sense of things that, and John, you mentioned you introduced the VLab survey earlier today. Do we have any sense of things that are missing, things that are a glaring gap in VLab capabilities at the current time, from a more technical perspective?
Yeah, on the technical side, there's the project management tools. That's an area where there's a desire to support that more fully. So that's one area. I'm trying to think. John, do you have any other
things that comes up periodically? Is sort of a need for like a chat feature that goes beyond what the current system provides, so where people can interact real time with each other, and also the wiki, the wiki area might need some work. But one other thing I'd add, just kind of, since we're talking about this idea, is one of the things that the VLab has is, and Ken led off with this in one of his slides, he showed this collaboration services on one side, development services on the other side. And this dichotomy is still a sort of a source of confusion for people, because they have to log into the VLab, and it's conceivable they might have to use a different password depending on whether or not they're a NOAA employee or not. And so I guess going forward, it would be nice if there was a plan to more unify these tools so that it's one VLab and everything seems to work more harmoniously without this sort of built-in schism between the tools.
Yeah, and I would piggyback off of that, John, and say, again, maybe the strategic planning team can look into this intent, but or suggest something in this realm. Is, I know one of the complaints has been some incompatibilities or just the integration, not only between the different components of VLab, but VLab into everything that we do on a day-to-day basis, in Gmail or in AWIPS. And I would think the same thing would apply for other NOAA line offices. It's just another thing that you have to go into, even if you have the single sign-on. So, anyways, that's something.
Yeah, one of the other areas that this is a one-stop site that I had mentioned I would show you earlier that I never did. You can see all the different line offices here, and so you can go to each of those, and they're providing access to key components and things that people need to get to on a daily basis. So anyway, it's the one spot to go, and a lot of energy went into developing this for each of those offices. And anyway, another area that I mentioned, cloud computing. There has been a desire, and it's just we haven't been able to get to it because of resources, and like with an IDP, there's no availability of resources. But it was called a common development and testing environment. The idea was to provide like a playground, like a computational playground for SUs and DOs and potentially ITOs within the Weather Service specifically, where you could provide them with access to larger data sets with computational power to be able to do prototyping and testing and things like that. There's a desire to do similar things with AWIPS, and I think there's also a need to do similar things like that for the field within AWIPS as well, where the people, they're being told, no, you can't do things within the AWIPS network, but then on the other hand, that's where the data is, and how do you do your development? And so it gets into a sensitive topic of local application development, and where do you want to do that? So,
Ken, that's an interesting. That's an interesting point. Question on that. So, take for AWIPS, for example, could VLab not only be a link to that, but how could the hosting of that be integrated? Where in a cloud computing sense, you could go into VLab, you could run some, you could piece some code together, and you could run it right there. Is that ability there for VLab, or are you talking about more where you can do your code work in VLab, but it has to be run somewhere else?
Well, what we're talking about is, and where we've focused our energy it was the easier lift, and that was providing the services to do development, but not necessarily the environment in which you're actually doing your development, if that makes sense. So we're not providing the computational power to actually do the development today. There's a way to move in this direction, and that's what I've been trying to move us in this direction. That is through Jenkins, and actually have an environment, a standardized environment where people could do builds. They could actually do AWIPS type development, check in their code, and then you don't have to worry about the build environment and things like that, and the resources to handle that. That would be done within VLab, and that's one of the things that I think could be done sooner rather than later, and we're trying to work on plans for that. But what I'm actually talking about was providing actual places where you could log in, do application development or testing, things like that. Maybe you're running a local model or doing other type of work. My focus initially when I was asked to think about this was to focus on AWIPS because that's what I knew best. But that doesn't mean that there are lots of other things that could potentially be done. It's a black, the hard part about it, it's a very open-ended question, but technology is there today with cloud computing to very quickly spin up VMs and basically have different images to do different sorts of things, so that you could have one that would be focused on doing development in particular release of AWIPS and have all that data be available and EDEX and everything there. You could have another that would be a particular variant of a local model. And so these are just things off the top of my head. These aren't coming from the Weather Service or anything like that, but that's an area where I think VLab could tie into that. So basically, you could have the forms and things like that that would make, where you could make those sorts of requests, and then it could launch you and, you know, create the keys and be your access point to get into these, you know, cloud computing resources. There's a lot that could potentially be done here. Obviously, there would have to be the resources, both money as well as, you know, administration staff to support it. And that's, you know, that's the harder part of it, of this.
Hey, this is Jonathan again. I'll throw one more question if there's time. How
Sure.
is user, like, how is input collected on needs and desires? I know there's methods you guys do that, and you collect recommendations and stuff, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So there's a, if you look at, we have the VLab improvement team has a form that you can go out to and you know, submit your ideas there. Let me go back to it. So, so if we come into here and we go out to the VLab improvement team, VLab, there we go. I think it's on the public facing one, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so we've got the suggestion form here, and then that allows people to make those sorts of requests. We also have, you know, at the top level under help, there's, if you click on need help, and within there, there's a, you know, providing us feedback or share an improvement idea, and this ties in with the VLab improvement team. So that I just showed you, that takes you there. But so those are the primary ways. We also support, you know, some of the more polished users know that we're using Redmine for the issues, and they'll create an issue straight within Redmine and assign it to us. Like some of the AWIPS program office that they've done, they do that quite frequently. So.
And then, so how does the VLab team manage all those suggestions? I guess that's not an easy thing.
Yeah, well, that's what the VLab improvement team is there to help us with. And so basically, the ideas get proposed, and then there's a sponsor. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but of the idea, and they basically propose it to the team. It gets, if it's endorsed by the team, and a majority of the people say, yes, it's a good idea, or second it. John and Brian would know better. They're more closely tied in, but basically it gets sponsored. They say, yeah, it looks good, and then voting takes place within the VLab improvement team, and they give it a impact score, not an impact score, a priority. And so that then is used as guidance by us, so that when we're going out and doing work, and when I'm assigning issues to different people, I can look at that and say, okay, well, this is, you know, a number 9. That's the most important thing. Single sign-on was a number 9, so we spent a lot of energy on that, even though it was a big deal and a lot of effort. Sometimes, you know, we get something that's a little bit lower priority, but much easier to implement. So we have to weigh that. So that's the main way in which requests and things come in. Sometimes we'll get requests outside of that process, you know, that come through Steve directly, or, you know, like the AWIPS program talked about, we need to move the software collaboration portal that was being used. They were using a different piece of software called Track for that. And so we had to spend time on that. And so, but for the most part, the way that we're moving, and we're trying to get everything to go through the VIT, because we need to have that external team to, you know, provide some guidance.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments? Well, if you guys want, okay, yeah. If you have any follow-up questions or if you think of things, just let me know. So.
Yeah, John. Bill never joined, right?
To my knowledge, no.
Okay, fine. Yeah, I mean, just follow up with him, just to let him know what happened, and send out the recording and see what Bill's up to. So
wonderful, dude.
But thanks to everybody else for joining. I think it's a good. Some of the things you brought up here were a good start.
All right.
Thanks for that presentation, Ken. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. So, like I said, if there are any questions or if you want to have follow-on discussions, just let me know. So, but all right, you all have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye.